The iron shackles bit into Adelaide Sterling's wrists as she stood on the auction block in the scorching Arizona sun, her throat tight with humiliation, while a crowd of men gathered below to bid on her like she was nothing more than livestock. Casa Grande's main square had never felt so suffocating, the dusty heat of August 1884 pressing down on her shoulders as the auctioneer, a portly man named Clarence with tobacco-stained teeth, shouted numbers that made her stomach turn. She had lived in this town for 3 years as Edward Sterling's wife, and now these same people who had smiled at her in church were watching her degradation with hungry eyes. Some looked away in shame, but most watched with the cold calculation of men sizing up a horse or a piece of property. "Do I hear 500?" Clarence bellowed, his voice carrying across the crowd. "This here's a fine woman, gentlemen. Young, healthy, can cook and clean. Her husband's debts total near about $800, and she's the collateral he put up before he went and got himself killed in that poker game last week." Adelaide wanted to scream that Edward had been shot by a man he had cheated, that her husband had been a liar and a cheat who had forged her signature on documents she had never seen, but her voice caught in her throat. The rope around her wrists made her feel like an animal, and tears burned behind her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. She would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing her break. A man in a gray suit called out, "500. Another voice, rougher, shouted, "550. Adelaide's gaze swept over the crowd, looking for any familiar face that might show kindness, but she found only strangers and acquaintances who had become strangers through their silence. Then her eyes landed on a man standing at the back of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather vest over a dark blue shirt. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but something about the way he stood, utterly still while others shifted and jostled, made her focus on him. 600, someone called out, and Adelaide flinched. The tall man at the back pushed his hat up slightly, and she saw his face for the first time. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 28 or 30, with a strong jaw darkened by several days of stubble and eyes that seemed to be assessing the situation with careful intensity. There was something different in his expression, not the leering hunger she saw in the others, but something that looked almost like anger. 650, another bidder shouted. The auctioneer grinned, revealing those yellowed teeth. "That's more like it, gentlemen. Do I hear 7? Adelaide's breath came shallow and fast. $700. The amount was staggering, more than most men in Casa Grande made in 2 years. The reality of her situation crashed over her again, wave after terrible wave. Whoever bought her would own her, at least until she worked off the debt, which could take years, maybe decades. The law was clear on that point. Edward's creditors had the right to collect, and she was what he had offered as security. The tall man in the back stepped forward, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. $1,600. The crowd fell silent, every head turning to stare at him. Adelaide's heart stopped, then started again with a painful thud. $1,600, exactly double what Edward had owed. It was an impossible sum, an amount that made no sense. Clarence's mouth fell open. "Did you say 1,600, Mr. Turner?" "I did." The man's voice was deep and steady, carrying authority that made people step aside as he moved through the crowd toward the platform. "That should more than settle Sterling's debts and cover any administrative fees." "Well, yes, but," Clarence stammered, clearly thrown by this turn of events, "that's far more than necessary, sir. I know what it is." The man, Turner, reached the front of the platform and looked up at Adelaide for the first time, his eyes meeting hers. They were gray-blue, like the sky before a storm, and something in them made her breath catch. "Do we have an agreement or not?" Clarence recovered quickly, greed overcoming his surprise. "Of course, Mr. Turner. Sold to Yates Turner for $1,600. That's quite generous of you, sir." Adelaide's knees nearly buckled as the reality sank in. She had been sold. No matter how she tried to frame it in her mind, that was the truth. Yates Turner now owned her debt, which meant he owned her. She watched as he pulled a leather wallet from his vest and began counting out bills with methodical precision, his hands steady and sure. The auctioneer scrambled down from the platform to collect the money, leaving Adelaide standing alone in her shackles, still on display for the dispersing crowd. Most people were already walking away, the spectacle over, though a few lingered to watch Turner complete the transaction and whisper among themselves about the rancher who had just paid a small fortune for a dead gambler's wife. Yates handed over the last of the bills and turned to the platform. "Get those shackles off her," Clarence blinked. "Sir, it's customary to keep the restraints until now." The single word carried enough weight that Clarence hurried to comply, his fingers fumbling with the key as he unlocked the iron cuffs around Adelaide's wrists. The metal fell away, leaving red marks on her skin, and she immediately pulled her hands to her chest, rubbing at the sore spots. "Come down from there," Yates said, not unkindly, extending his hand toward her. Adelaide hesitated, her mind racing. This man had just bought her, paid twice what was necessary, and she had no idea why. She did not know him, had never seen him before today, and his motives were a complete mystery. But standing on that platform with the sun beating down and the marks of the shackles burning on her wrists, she had no choice. She took his hand. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked with them daily, and he helped her down from the platform with surprising gentleness. Once her feet touched the ground, he released her hand immediately and stepped back, giving her space. "I have a horse at the livery," he said. "We should go." "Go where?" Adelaide's voice came out rougher than she intended, scratched from the dust and her determination not to cry. "My ranch. It's about 10 miles north of town." He glanced around at the remaining onlookers, his expression hardening. "Unless you would rather stay here and deal with the spectators." Adelaide followed his gaze and saw the way people were still watching, their eyes full of judgment and curiosity. Her face burned with fresh humiliation. "No, let us go." They walked through the streets of Casa Grande in silence, Adelaide acutely aware of the stares they received. Women pulled their children closer and whispered behind their hands. Men watched with expressions ranging from confusion to envy. She had been respectable once, a merchant's daughter from Tucson who had made what her parents thought was a good match with Adelaide Sterling. Now she was something else entirely, something people looked at with pity or contempt. The livery stable smelled of hay and horse, familiar, and somehow comforting after the exposed humiliation of the town square. Yates moved to a large bay gelding and began checking the saddle, his movements efficient and practiced. Adelaide stood nearby, uncertain, her hands still absently rubbing the marks on her wrists. "That must hurt," Yates said without looking at her, adjusting a stirrup. "There's a doctor on the way to the ranch. We can stop if you need." "I am fine," Adelaide said automatically, though the marks did hurt, throbbing with each heartbeat. He did look at her then, those storm-colored eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. She would not show weakness, not now, not after everything. "You do not have to lie to me," he said quietly. "I am not going to hurt you. You bought me," Adelaide said, the words bitter on her tongue. "You own my debt, which means you own me. Forgive me if I do not immediately trust your assurances." Something that might have been pain flickered across his face, but it was gone so quickly she could not be sure. "I bought your debt," he agreed, But I do not own you. Nobody owns another person, not really, no matter what the law says. Before Adelaide could respond to that confusing statement, Yates led the horse out of the stable. He swung into the saddle with easy grace, then extended his hand down to her. "Can you ride?" Yes. It had been years since she had ridden regularly, but she had grown up around horses. "Good. Put your foot in the stirrup and swing up behind me." It was awkward and undignified, and Adelaide was painfully aware of how close she had to sit to him once she was seated behind the saddle, but Yates did not comment. He simply clucked to the horse, and they started moving, leaving Casa Grande behind them in a cloud of dust. The Arizona landscape stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving under the August sun. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, their arms reaching toward the cloudless sky, and the distant mountains shimmered in the heat. Adelaide had never felt smaller than she did at that moment, riding behind a stranger toward an unknown future. They rode in silence for nearly an hour before Yates spoke. "Your husband was a fool." Adelaide's hands, which had been resting lightly at her sides, tightened into fists. "He was many things, Mr. Turner, but I would thank you not to speak ill of the dead. Even when the dead man used you as collateral for his gambling debts." There was no mockery in his voice, only genuine curiosity. "Even then," Adelaide said, though the words felt hollow, "he was my husband. Did you love him?" The question was so unexpected, so personal, that Adelaide nearly fell off the horse. "That is none of your concern." "Fair enough." Yates shifted slightly in the saddle, and Adelaide became aware of how her position forced her to lean against his back to maintain her balance. "But I will tell you this, Adelaide Sterling. Whatever you think is going to happen when we reach my ranch, you are probably wrong." "Then enlighten me, Mr. Turner. What exactly are your intentions to set you free?" The simple statement made no sense. Adelaide stared at the back of his head, at the dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it met his collar. "I do not understand." "You will," Yates said. "When we get to the ranch, you will understand everything." They rode on, the sun climbing higher, the heat becoming oppressive. Adelaide's dress, a simple gray cotton that had been her second best before Edward died but was now her only decent garment, clung to her back with sweat. She was thirsty and exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but she refused to complain. Whatever Yates Turner had planned, she would face it with as much dignity as she could muster. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a smudge on the horizon, then taking shape as buildings and fences. It was larger than Adelaide had expected. A substantial spread with a two-story house, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses grazed in the shade. As they drew closer, she could see that everything was well maintained, the fences straight and strong, the buildings freshly painted. This was not the property of a struggling rancher, but of someone successful. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, older with graying hair and a weathered face. He raised a hand in greeting. "Boss, we were not expecting you back so soon." "Change of plans, Samuel." Yates brought the horse to a stop near the house and dismounted, then reached up to help Adelaide down. His hands at her waist were impersonal, steadying her until her feet touched the ground before releasing her immediately. "This is Adelaide Sterling. She will be staying with us." Samuel's eyes widened slightly, and Adelaide saw recognition dawn. News traveled fast in Arizona territory, and apparently word of the auction had already reached Yates Turner's ranch. To his credit, Samuel's expression shifted quickly to something that looked like sympathy. "Madam, welcome." "Thank you," Adelaide managed, though the word felt strange. She did not feel welcomed. She felt purchased. "Samuel, have Maria prepare the guest room," Yates instructed. And bring some water and food up to the house. We have things to discuss. Right away, boss. Samuel headed toward one of the outbuildings, glancing back once at Adelaide with undisguised curiosity. Yates gestured toward the house. Come inside. It is cooler out of the sun. The interior of the house was indeed cooler, and Adelaide could not help but notice the quality of the furnishings. The main room had comfortable furniture, braided rugs on the wooden floors, and curtains at the windows that looked like they had been professionally made. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with more volumes than she had expected to see in a rancher's home. Sit, Yates said, indicating a chair near the empty fireplace. Please. Adelaide sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Yates paced across the room, removed his hat and tossed it onto a side table, then ran his hand through his hair. For the first time since she had seen him, he looked uncertain. I do not know how to say this without it sounding strange, he began. I have been shackled and sold at auction today, Mr. Turner. I doubt you can say anything stranger than what I have already experienced. He almost smiled, a slight quirk at the corner of his mouth that was gone almost immediately. True enough. He took a deep breath. I paid $1,600 for your debt because I wanted to ensure no one else could bid against me. I paid double because I wanted enough surplus to give you a fresh start. Adelaide's heart began to pound. I do not understand. The debt was $800. I paid $1,600. That leaves $800, which I am giving to you along with your freedom. Yates pulled an envelope from his vest and placed it on the small table beside her chair. That should be enough to start over somewhere. Maybe go back to your family in Tucson or travel to California if you prefer. Whatever you want. Adelaide stared at the envelope like it was a snake that might strike. Why would you do that? Because what happened to you today was wrong. Yates's voice was firm, his eyes steady on hers. The law allowed it, but that does not make it right. No person should be sold to pay another person's debts. But you still participated in it. You still bought me. I did, Yates acknowledged. Because if I had not, someone else would have, and they would not have set you free. They would have kept you, worked you, maybe worse. This way, you get to choose your own future. Adelaide's mind struggled to process this information. It was too much, too unexpected. She had spent the last week since Edward's death in a haze of shock and fear, knowing the auction was coming but unable to stop it, unable to find anyone who would help her. And now this stranger, this rancher she had never met, was offering her not just freedom but the means to start over. I do not know what to say, she whispered. You do not have to say anything right now. Yates moved to the window, looking out at his land. You have been through an ordeal. Stay here tonight, rest, eat a proper meal. Tomorrow or the next day, when you have had time to think clearly, you can decide what you want to do. A knock at the door interrupted them, and a woman entered carrying a tray. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a bun. Mr. Turner, I brought water and some cold chicken and bread. Thank you, Maria. This is Adelaide Sterling. She will be staying in the guest room tonight. Maria set the tray down on the table, her eyes taking in Adelaide's disheveled appearance and the marks on her wrists with obvious concern. Of course. The room is being prepared now. Miss Sterling, if you need anything at all, you just let me know. Thank you, Adelaide said softly, touched by the genuine warmth in the woman's voice. After Maria left, Yates poured water into a glass and handed it to Adelaide. She drank gratefully, not realizing how thirsty she was until the cool liquid touched her lips. She drained the glass, and Yates refilled it without comment. Eat something, he said, gesturing to the food. Then Maria will show you to your room. You can rest, clean up, whatever you need. Adelaide picked up a piece of bread, her hands trembling slightly. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by exhaustion so profound she could barely keep her eyes open. "Mr. Turner, Yates," he interrupted. "You can call me Yates. Yates." The name felt strange on her tongue. "If this is real, if you truly mean to set me free, then I do not know how to thank you. You do not need to thank me for doing what should have been done in the first place." He picked up his hat from the side table. "I will leave you to eat in peace. Maria will be back shortly." He left the room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and Adelaide was alone. She ate mechanically, barely tasting the food, her mind spinning with questions and possibilities. Freedom. The word felt foreign, impossible. For 3 years she had been Edward's wife, her every action dictated by his whims and demands. Before that, she had been her father's daughter, expected to be obedient and proper. She had never truly been free, had never had the power to make her own choices. And now this stranger was offering her exactly that. Maria returned as Adelaide was finishing the last of the bread. "Come with me, dear. I will show you to your room." The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a real bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and windows that looked out over the ranch. Clean clothes had been laid out on the bed, a simple dress that looked like it might actually fit. "Those were mine before I got a bit rounder," Maria said with a gentle smile. "You are welcome to them. There is water in the pitcher for washing, and I will heat some for a proper bath if you would like." "That would be wonderful," Adelaide admitted. "Thank you, Maria." "It is no trouble at all, dear." Maria hesitated at the door. "Mr. Turner is a good man. Whatever happened in town today, whatever brought you here, you are safe now. I promise you that." After Maria left, Adelaide stood at the window, looking out at the unfamiliar landscape. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there was her future, whatever that might be. She could take the money Yates had given her and leave, start fresh in a new place where no one knew her story. She could go back to Tucson, face her parents' judgment and disappointment, try to rebuild a life there. Or she could stay here, at least for a little while, and try to understand the man who had saved her. Over the next few days, Adelaide began to settle into the rhythms of ranch life. Yates had been true to his word, treating her not as a servant or property but as a guest. He took his meals with her, polite but somewhat distant, clearly trying to give her space while also making sure she had everything she needed. Maria hovered over her like a mother hen, making sure she ate enough, that her room was comfortable, that she wanted for nothing. Adelaide learned that Yates had built this ranch from nothing over the past 8 years, starting with a small plot of land and a handful of cattle, and growing it into one of the most successful operations in the territory. He employed a dozen men, treated them fairly, and had a reputation for honesty that was rare in the often cutthroat world of ranching. "He is a good boss," Samuel told her one afternoon as she sat on the porch watching the men work with the horses. "Fair pay, good food does not ask us to do anything he would not do himself. There are not many like him." "How long have you worked for him?" Adelaide asked. 5 years now. Came here after my wife passed, needed a fresh start. Mr. Turner gave me that." Samuel squinted at the horizon. "He has a way of helping people, that one. Quiet about it, does not make a fuss, but he sees when someone needs a hand and he provides it." Adelaide thought about that as she watched Yates in the corral, working with a young horse that was being trained to saddle. He moved with patient confidence, his voice low and soothing as he worked the animal in circles, gradually building trust. There was something mesmerizing about watching him work, the easy way he commanded respect without force, the strength in his movements tempered by gentleness. She had been at the ranch for 4 days, and she still had not decided what to do. The envelope with the money sat untouched in her room, a constant reminder that she could leave whenever she chose. But something kept her there, some pull she did not quite understand. That evening, Yates invited her to walk with him after dinner. They strolled through the ranch yard as the sun set, the air finally cooling after another scorching day. "You have been very quiet since you arrived," Yates observed. "Are you well?" "I am well enough," Adelaide replied. "Just thinking about what you will do next." "Yes." She paused, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Can I ask you something, of course? Why did you really do it? Buy my debt and set me free?" Adelaide turned to face him. "Please do not tell me it was just because it was the right thing to do. I think there is more to it than that." Yates was silent for a long moment, his profile strong against the darkening sky. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "My mother was sold to settle my father's debts when I was 12 years old." Adelaide's breath caught. "Oh, Yates. He was a drunk and a gambler, not unlike your husband, I would imagine. Got himself into debt he could not pay, and the creditors came calling. Back then, we lived in Texas. The law there allowed the same thing Arizona does now. They took my mother right out of our house and sold her to a man who owned a ranch 3 counties over." Yates's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I tried to stop them, got a broken arm for my trouble. My father drank himself to death within a year, and I never saw my mother again." "I am so sorry," Adelaide whispered. "I swore when I was old enough, when I had enough money, I would never let that happen to someone else if I could prevent it." He looked at her then, his eyes bright with old pain. "When I heard they were auctioning you in Casa Grande, I knew I had to do something. I could not save my mother, but I could save you." Adelaide's throat tightened with emotion. All this time, she had been trying to understand his motives, looking for some hidden agenda, some reason that would make sense in the harsh logic of the world she knew. She had not expected this raw honesty, this glimpse into a pain that mirrored her own. "Your mother would be proud of what you have become," she said softly. "I like to think so." Yates's voice was gruff. "But it does not change what happened to her, does not bring her back." They stood in the gathering darkness, the sounds of the ranch settling around them, and something shifted between them. Adelaide felt it, a connection forming, fragile as new growth but undeniably there. "I have not thanked you properly," she said. "Not really. You gave me back my life, Yates. I do not know how to repay that. I told you, you do not need to, I know what you said." Adelaide stepped closer to him. "But I still want to thank you. What you did was extraordinary, and I will never forget it." In the dim light, she saw him smile, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "You are welcome, Adelaide Sterling." They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, and Adelaide felt something she had not felt in years. Hope, maybe even the beginning of happiness. The days that followed settled into a pleasant routine. Adelaide found herself helping Maria in the kitchen, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She learned how to make tortillas from scratch, how to prepare the spicy stews that the ranch hands loved, how to bake bread in the temperamental oven that required constant attention. Her hands, which had been soft from years of minimal work as Edward's wife, developed calluses and strength. She also spent time in the ranch's small library, discovering that Yates was an avid reader despite his rugged exterior. They began to discuss books over dinner, their conversations ranging from novels to philosophy, to practical matters of ranching and agriculture. Adelaide found herself looking forward to these evening talks, the way Yates's eyes lit up when he was passionate about a subject, the deep rumble of his laugh when she said something that amused him. One afternoon, Nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, Yates found her in the kitchen garden that Maria tended behind the house. She was weeding the rows of tomatoes and peppers, her borrowed dress dusty and her hair coming loose from its pins. "You do not have to do that," Yates said, leaning against the fence. "I know." Adelaide sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But I want to help. Maria does so much, and I feel useless just sitting around." "You are not useless, Adelaide. You are a guest." "A guest who has overstayed her welcome, perhaps." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "I have been here 2 weeks, Yates. I should make a decision about what I am going to do." His expression became carefully neutral. "Have you decided?" Adelaide looked around at the ranch, at the life that had begun to feel familiar and comfortable. "I do not want to go back to Tucson. My parents would take me in out of duty, but they would never let me forget what happened, what I had become. And I do not know anyone in California or anywhere else. So what will you do?" "I thought I might stay here if you would allow it." The words came out in a rush before she could lose her nerve. "Not as a guest, but working. I could help Maria with the cooking and cleaning, earn my keep properly. I would not expect wages beyond room and board, just a place to stay until I figure out what comes next." Yates was quiet for so long that Adelaide began to think she had made a terrible mistake. Perhaps he had been waiting for her to leave, had been too polite to push her to make a decision. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "You do not have to do that," he finally said. "You have money, your freedom, you could do anything you want." "I want to stay," Adelaide said firmly, "at least for a while, unless you do not want me here. It is not that." Yates removed his hat and ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Adelaide had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "I worry about people talking, about your reputation." "My reputation?" Adelaide could not help the bitter laugh that escaped. "Yates, I was sold at auction like a piece of furniture. My reputation is already destroyed. At least here I feel safe. I feel like I matter." His eyes met hers, intense and searching. "You matter, Adelaide. You matter more than you know." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Adelaide felt her heart beat faster, felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "So I can stay?" she asked quietly. "You can stay as long as you want," Yates said, "but not as hired help, as a member of this household, as someone who belongs here." "Thank you," Adelaide whispered. As summer faded into fall, the relationship between Adelaide and Yates deepened in ways neither had anticipated. They continued their evening conversations, but now they also worked side by side during the day. Adelaide proved to have a natural way with the horses, and Yates taught her to ride properly, to understand the animals' moods and movements. She learned to rope and brand, to recognize signs of illness in the cattle, to mend fences and maintain equipment. The physical work was demanding, but Adelaide discovered she loved it. For the first time in her life, she felt truly capable, truly strong. Her body changed, becoming leaner and more muscular, her skin tanning despite the bonnets Maria insisted she wear. She felt alive in a way she never had before. Yates watched these changes with an expression Adelaide could not quite read. Sometimes she caught him looking at her with something that might have been admiration, or perhaps something deeper. But he never said anything, never crossed the careful line they had established between friendship and something more. It was Maria who finally brought the unspoken tension to a head. One evening in late October, she found Adelaide in her room staring out the window at the sunset. "You love him," Maria said simply. Adelaide started, nearly dropping the book she had been pretending to read. "What, Mr. Turner? You are in love with him?" Maria sat on the edge of the bed, her expression knowing. "It is written all over your face every time you look at him." "That is ridiculous," Adelaide protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "He saved me from a terrible situation. I am grateful, that is all." Gratitude does not make your eyes light up when he walks into a room. Gratitude does not make you smile at nothing when you are thinking about him. Maria patted Adelaide's hand. "I have eyes, dear. I have seen the way things are between you." Adelaide sank onto the bed beside Maria, her defenses crumbling. "Even if that were true, which I am not saying it is, it does not matter. Yates does not see me that way. He sees me as someone he helped, a charity case." "That man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars," Maria said firmly. "But he is too honorable to say anything. He thinks you would feel obligated to him because of what he did, that you could not freely choose him because of the circumstances of how you met. That is absurd. I am not obligated to him for anything. He set me free." "Then perhaps you should tell him that." Maria stood, smoothing her skirts. "Life is too short to waste on pride and fear, Adelaide. If you love him, tell him. See what happens." After Maria left, Adelaide sat in the gathering darkness, her mind racing. Did she love Yates? The question itself seemed almost absurd. She had only known him for 3 months, and her experience with love was limited to a disastrous marriage that had taught her more about pain than affection. But when she was honest with herself, she could not deny the truth. She loved the way Yates threw his head back when he laughed, the way his hands were always gentle despite their strength, the way he listened to her opinions as if they mattered. She loved his integrity, his kindness, the way he treated everyone from the newest ranch hand to the oldest cow with respect and consideration. She loved him, completely and terrifyingly. The question was what to do about it. The next day, Adelaide's courage failed her completely. And the day after that. It was not until a week later, when Yates announced he was riding to Tucson on business and would be gone for several days, that Adelaide realized she could not let him leave without saying something. She found him in the barn, preparing his horse for the journey. The early morning light slanted through the gaps in the walls, turning the dust motes into tiny stars. "You are leaving early," Adelaide said from the doorway. Yates turned, surprised. "I wanted to get on the road before it got too hot. Did you need something?" "I needed to talk to you." Adelaide stepped into the barn, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Before you go." "What is it?" Concern crossed his face. "Is something wrong?" "No, yes, I do not know." Adelaide took a deep breath. "Yates, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." He set down the saddle he had been holding and gave her his full attention. "All right. When you bought my debt and set me free, you gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You gave me my life back, my choice, my freedom. I will always be grateful for that." Adelaide twisted her hands together, forcing herself to continue. "But gratitude is not the only thing I feel for you. Over these past months I have come to care for you, more than care for you. I have fallen in love with you, Yates Turner, and I needed you to know that before you left." Yates stood absolutely still, his expression unreadable. Adelaide felt panic rise in her chest. She had made a terrible mistake. She had misread everything, and now she had ruined the comfortable friendship they had built. "You do not have to say anything," she said quickly. "I know this is unexpected, and I do not want you to feel obligated in any way. I just could not let you leave without being honest. Adelaide." Yates's voice was rough, strained. "Do you mean that?" Every word. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and cupped her face in his hands. "I have been in love with you since the day I saw you standing on that auction block, refusing to cry even though your world was falling apart. I have been in love with you every day since, watching you become stronger and more beautiful with each passing moment. But I could not say anything because I was afraid you would feel trapped, that you would think you had to return my feelings out of gratitude or obligation. I do not feel trapped, Adelaide said, her voice barely a whisper. I feel free for the first time in my life, and I choose you. I choose this, whatever this is between us. Yates lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once. Adelaide melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, every nerve in her body singing with the rightness of it. This was nothing like the perfunctory kisses Edward had occasionally bestowed on her. This was passion and tenderness and promise all wrapped into one perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Adelaide Sterling. I love you too, Adelaide said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. I still have to go to Tucson, Yates said reluctantly. I have business there that cannot wait. I know. But when you come back, we will figure out what this means, what we are to each other. I already know what you are to me. Yates kissed her again, soft and sweet. You are my future if you will have me. Yes, Adelaide said simply. Yes to everything. Yates left an hour later, and Adelaide watched him ride away with her heart full to bursting. Maria found her standing in the yard, staring at the horizon long after Yates had disappeared from view. I see you took my advice, Maria said with a smile. I did. Adelaide turned to her, unable to keep the joy from her face. He loves me, Maria, he loves me. Of course he does, dear. Anyone with eyes could see that. Maria linked her arm through Adelaide's. Come inside. We have a lot to do before he gets back. What do you mean? If I know Mr. Turner, and I do, he is going to propose the minute he returns. Which means we need to get you a proper dress and make sure this ranch is ready for a celebration. Maria's eyes twinkled. I have been waiting for this day for a long time. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Maria enlisted Adelaide's help in a thorough cleaning of the house. Though Adelaide suspected it was more about keeping her occupied than any actual need for cleaning. Samuel and the other ranch hands seemed to sense something was different, shooting knowing glances and grinning whenever Adelaide walked by. On the 4th day, one of the hands called out that a rider was approaching. Adelaide's heart leaped as she recognized Yates's horse, and she had to resist the urge to run out to meet him. Instead, she waited on the porch, her hands smoothing the front of the new dress Maria had helped her make from fabric they had in storage. Yates dismounted and walked toward her, his eyes never leaving her face. When he reached the porch steps, he dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Adelaide Sterling, I went to Tucson for supplies, but mostly I went for this. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. It was my mother's ring, the only thing of hers I have left. I got it from the man who bought her debt, tracked him down years ago. He did not know what happened to her, but he had kept her things. Yates's voice was thick with emotion. I want you to have it if you will marry me, if you will be my wife and my partner and the love of my life. Adelaide's vision blurred with tears. Yes, Yates. Yes, I will marry you. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, and stood to pull her into his arms. The ranch hands who had gathered to watch erupted in cheers and applause. Maria appeared from the house with tears streaming down her face, already planning the wedding out loud. They were married 2 weeks later in Casa Grande's small church, the same town where Adelaide had been auctioned. But now, she stood there as a free woman choosing her own future. The irony was not lost on either of them. Some of the townspeople attended out of curiosity, others out of genuine happiness for the couple. Adelaide did not care. She only had eyes for Yates, standing tall and handsome in his best suit, looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The circuit preacher, A kind man named Reverend Mills smiled as he pronounced them husband and wife. When Yates kissed her, Adelaide felt the last chains of her past fall away completely. She was no longer Edward Sterling's widow, no longer the woman who had been sold at auction. She was Adelaide Turner, wife of Yates Turner, and she had never been happier. The celebration at the ranch lasted late into the night, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Adelaide danced with Yates under the stars, his arms strong around her, and thought about how far she had come from that terrible day in August. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, his breath warm against her ear as they swayed to the music. "How grateful I am that you were in that crowd," Adelaide said honestly. "How different my life would be if you had not been there." "I will always be there," Yates promised. "For the rest of our lives, Adelaide, you will never face anything alone again." Their wedding night was everything Adelaide had hoped it would be and nothing like her experiences with Edward. Yates was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. When they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Adelaide's eyes. This was what love was supposed to be, she realized. This partnership, this mutual respect and desire, this feeling of being treasured. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Yates's fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I want to ask you something," Adelaide said softly. "About your mother. You can ask me anything. Do you really not know what happened to her, where she ended up?" Yates was quiet for a moment. "I searched for years. Hired investigators, followed every lead. The man who bought her debt sold it to someone else within a year, and the trail went cold after that. She could be anywhere or she could be dead. I will probably never know." "I am sorry," Adelaide whispered. "I made my peace with it a long time ago." Yates pulled her closer. "I like to think she would be happy for us, that she would know her suffering led to something good, even if she never got to see it herself. I think she would be very proud of the man you have become. I hope so." Yates kissed the top of her head. "Now stop worrying about the past and focus on the future. Our future." Adelaide smiled in the darkness. "Our future. I like the sound of that." The first year of their marriage was one of discovery and growth. Adelaide threw herself into learning everything she could about running the ranch, becoming Yates's true partner in the business. She proved to have a head for numbers and organization, taking over the ranch's accounts and correspondence. Together, they expanded their operation, buying more land and increasing their herd. But it was not all work. Yates taught Adelaide to shoot, spending long afternoons at the makeshift range behind the barn until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. They rode out together in the evenings, exploring the vast Arizona landscape, finding secret places where they could be alone under the endless sky. Yates showed her things she had never noticed before, the tracks of different animals, the best places to find water in the dry season, the way the light changed the color of the mountains. Adelaide, in turn, brought books and learning to the ranch. She started teaching some of the ranch hands who could not raid, holding classes in the evening when the work was done. She convinced Yates to subscribe to newspapers and journals from back east, keeping them all informed about the wider world. She planted a larger garden, expanded Maria's small patch into rows of vegetables and herbs that supplied the ranch with fresh produce. They were happy, genuinely happy, in a way that still surprised Adelaide sometimes. She had never imagined marriage could be like this, a true partnership built on mutual respect and love. When Adelaide discovered she was pregnant the following spring, she was both terrified and elated. Her own mother had nearly died giving birth to Adelaide's younger brother, and the memory of that fear had stayed with her. But Yates was overjoyed, his happiness infectious enough to overcome most of her anxiety. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "A family of our own. You are not worried?" Adelaide asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Of course I am worried. I am terrified." Yates met her eyes in the lamplight. "But I am also excited and grateful and so full of love I think I might burst. We will get through this together, Adelaide, just like we do everything else." Dr. Harrison, the physician from Casa Grande, made regular visits to the ranch as Adelaide's pregnancy progressed. He assured them both that Adelaide was healthy and strong, that everything was developing as it should. Maria hovered over her like a mother hen, insisting she rest more, eat more, worry less. Adelaide gave birth on a cold January night in 1886, a difficult labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Yates stayed with her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement even when Adelaide was sure she could not go on. When their son finally came into the world with a loud, healthy cry, Adelaide wept with relief and joy. "A boy," Dr. Harrison announced, placing the squalling infant in Adelaide's arms. "A fine, healthy boy." Yates looked down at his son with an expression of such pure love and wonder that Adelaide fell in love with him all over again. "He is perfect," Yates whispered. "Thank you, Adelaide. Thank you for giving me this." They named him James William Turner, after Yates's father and Adelaide's grandfather, men who had been flawed but whose names they wanted to honor. James had his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, and from the moment he was born, he owned both his parents' hearts completely. Watching Yates with their son was a revelation for Adelaide. He was patient and gentle, unafraid to change diapers or walk the floor with a crying baby in the middle of the night. He talked to James constantly, telling him about the ranch, about the horses, about anything and everything that crossed his mind. As James grew from infant to toddler, Yates was there for every milestone, every achievement, cheering his son on with unrestrained pride. "You are a wonderful father," Adelaide told him one evening when James was nearly 2. They were sitting on the porch, watching their son toddle around the yard under Maria's watchful eye. "I had a poor example to learn from," Yates said. "I just try to do the opposite of what my father did." "Well, you are succeeding. James adores you. The feeling is mutual." Yates pulled Adelaide close, kissing her temple. "I never imagined I could be this happy. Sometimes it scares me like it is too good to last." "It will last," Adelaide said firmly. "We will make sure of it." When James was 3, Adelaide became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and when their daughter was born in the spring of 1889, it was after a shorter labor and with less drama. Margaret Rose Turner came into the world on a sunny April morning, and she was as different from her brother as night from day. Where James was serious and thoughtful, Margaret was all smiles and laughter from the start. The ranch continued to prosper under Yates and Adelaide's management. They weathered droughts and market downturns, rustlers and disease, always working together to overcome whatever challenges arose. Adelaide's reputation in the territory grew as well. She became known as a woman of intelligence and capability, someone who could hold her own in business negotiations and who treated her workers with fairness and respect. The story of how they had met, which had once been a source of shame for Adelaide, became something else over the years. It became a testament to Yates's character, to his willingness to stand up against injustice, even when it cost him dearly. People respected that, even if some still whispered about the unconventional beginning of their relationship. One evening, when James was 7 and Margaret 4, a stranger arrived at the ranch. He was an old man, weathered and tired-looking, and he asked to speak with Yates privately. Adelaide watched from the house as they talked in the yard, saw the way Yates's posture changed, becoming tense and alert. When Yates came inside, his face was pale. "What is it?" Adelaide asked immediately. "What did that man want? He says he has information about my mother." Yates sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "He says he knows where she is." Adelaide's heart clenched. After all these years, after Yates had made peace with never knowing this. "What did he tell you?" "She is in Colorado, in a town called Pueblo. She has been there for over 15 years, working as a seamstress." Yates looked up at Adelaide, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Adelaide, she is alive. My mother is alive." "Then we need to go to her," Adelaide said immediately. "As soon as possible." They made arrangements quickly, leaving James and Margaret in Maria's capable care, and setting out for Colorado within the week. The journey took them north through New Mexico territory and into Colorado, a trip that took nearly 2 weeks by train and stagecoach. Pueblo was a mining town, rough around the edges but growing rapidly. They found the address the old man had given them, a small house on the edge of town with a sign in the window advertising alterations and dressmaking. Yates stood outside the door for a long moment, unable to move. Adelaide took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I am right here with you," she said softly. He knocked, and they waited. Adelaide could feel Yates's pulse racing under her fingers. The woman who opened the door was in her 50s, thin and graying, but Adelaide could see traces of Yates in her face, in the shape of her eyes and the line of her jaw. The woman looked at Yates and all the color drained from her face. "Yates?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Is that you?" "Hello, Mother," Yates said, and his voice broke on the last word. She pulled him into her arms, both of them weeping, years of separation and pain pouring out in that embrace. Adelaide stepped back, giving them space, her own tears falling freely. Later, sitting in her mother's small parlor with cups of tea growing cold on the table between them, they heard her story. After being sold, she had been passed from owner to owner, her debts sold and resold until finally she had ended up in Colorado. A kind man named Thomas Harper had bought her debt with the intention of freeing her, much as Yates had done for Adelaide. They had fallen in love and married, living together for 10 happy years until Thomas's death 3 years ago. "I looked for you," she told Yates, gripping his hands like she would never let go. "After Thomas freed me, I tried to find you, but you had left Texas and the trail was cold. I am so sorry, Yates. I never stopped thinking about you, never stopped hoping you were all right." "I looked for you too," Yates said. "For years. I never gave up hope that I would find you." Adelaide listened as they talked late into the night, filling in the gaps of lost years, sharing stories and memories. When Yates told his mother about Adelaide, about how they had met and fallen in love, the older woman took Adelaide's hands in her own. "You gave my son what I always wanted for him," she said, tears in her eyes. "A good life, a loving family, thank you for that." "He saved me first," Adelaide said softly. "We saved each other." They stayed in Pueblo for 2 weeks, soaking up every moment with Yates's mother. She met her grandchildren through the photographs they had brought, weeping over the images of James and Margaret. Before they left, they made plans for her to come to Arizona, to live with them on the ranch if she wanted, or at least to visit regularly. "I would like that," she said. "I would like to know my grandchildren, to be part of their lives." "You will always be part of our lives," Yates promised. "No more separations, no more lost years. We are a family now." The journey back to Arizona was joyful, despite the long miles. Yates talked constantly about the future, about having his mother nearby, about James and Margaret learning from their grandmother. Adelaide watched him with a full heart, grateful that this piece of his past had been restored, that the wound he had carried for so long could finally begin to heal. True to her word, Yates's mother, Elizabeth, came to live on the ranch that fall. They built her a small house near the main ranch house, close enough to be part of the family, but with enough privacy for independence. She and Maria became fast friends, and both James and Margaret adored their grandmother, often found sitting at her feet as she told them stories of Yates's childhood. The years that followed were peaceful and productive. James grew into a serious young man who shared his father's love of ranching and his mother's head for business. Margaret was spirited and bright, keeping everyone on their toes with her boundless energy and curiosity. They added 2 more children to their family, another boy named Thomas after Elizabeth's late husband, and finally a daughter they named Maria, after the woman who had been such a constant support to them all. The ranch expanded and prospered, becoming one of the largest and most successful operations in Arizona territory. When Arizona became a state in 1912, Yates and Adelaide were there to witness it, older and grayer but still as devoted to each other as they had been that first year. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Yates stood to make a toast. 25 years ago, I saw a woman standing on an auction block, and I knew I had to help her. What I did not know was that she would be the one to save me. He looked at Adelaide, his eyes full of the same love she had seen on their wedding day. You gave me a family, Adelaide. You gave me a purpose beyond just making money or building an empire. You taught me that love is not about ownership or obligation, but about choice and freedom and partnership. I choose you today just as surely as I did 25 years ago, and I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. Adelaide stood and went to her husband, kissing him to the applause and cheers of their family. And I choose you, she said, today and always. As she looked around at the life they had built together, at the children and grandchildren who carried their love forward into the future, Adelaide thought about that terrible day in Casa Grande when she had stood in shackles, thinking her life was over. She had been wrong. Her life had not ended that day. It had truly begun, set in motion by the kindness of a stranger who became her husband, her partner, her great love. Years later, when they were both in their 70s, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson, Adelaide reflected on their journey. You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been there that day? She asked Yates. If someone else had bought me. Yates was quiet for a moment, his weathered hand finding hers. I try not to think about it. The idea of you in someone else's hands, suffering through that kind of life, it is too painful. I think about it sometimes, Adelaide admitted. Not because I wish things were different, but because it reminds me how lucky I am. How one act of kindness changed everything. It was not just kindness, Yates said. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you refusing to cry, standing tall even in the worst moment of your life. I would have done anything to free you, Adelaide, anything at all. You gave me more than freedom, Adelaide said softly. You gave me a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, a family that fills my heart to bursting. You gave me everything. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, their hands intertwined, their hearts still beating in sync after all these years. Around them, the ranch settled into evening routines, the sounds of family and home creating a symphony of contentment. James, now married with 3 children of his own, stopped by to discuss ranch business. Margaret, who had married a lawyer from Tucson and divided her time between the city and the ranch, arrived with her 2 daughters for a weekend visit. Thomas, following in his father's footsteps, was out checking on the cattle with several of the ranch hands. Young Maria, the baby of the family, was studying to be a teacher, though she spent her summers at the ranch helping however she could. As Adelaide watched her family move through their lives, each one carving their own path, but always coming home to the ranch, she felt a profound sense of peace. This was what she and Yates had built together, a legacy of love and strength and freedom. Elizabeth, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack, joined them on the porch, settling into her favorite rocking chair with a soft sigh. "Beautiful evening," she observed, her eyes on the last streaks of color in the sky. "They all are," Yates said, "when you are with the people you love." Adelaide smiled, thinking about how far they had all come. Elizabeth, sold to pay debts and lost for so many years, now surrounded by family in her golden years. Yates, the boy who had lost everything, now a man who had everything that truly mattered. And herself, once a piece of property to be auctioned, now a woman of strength and purpose, loved and respected. "Tell us the story again, Grandma," a small voice piped up. Adelaide looked down to see her youngest granddaughter, Sarah, James's daughter, looking up at her with wide eyes. "Tell us how you and Grandpa fell in love." Adelaide glanced at Yates, who shrugged with a smile. They had told this story countless times, but their grandchildren never seemed to tire of hearing it. "Well," Adelaide began, pulling Sarah into her lap, "it was a very hot day in August many years ago in a town not too far from here." As she told the story, softening some of the harsher details for young ears but keeping the essential truth, Adelaide felt Yates's hand squeeze hers. This was their story, their truth, and it had led them to this moment, surrounded by love and legacy. The months and years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Adelaide and Yates grew older together, their hair going white, their movements slower, but their love never dimming. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, welcomed new grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and watched with pride as their family grew and flourished. When Yates's mother Elizabeth passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87, the whole family mourned her loss. But they also celebrated her life, the fact that she had been given so many years with her son and his family, so many years of freedom and happiness after the trauma of her youth. She was at peace, Yates said at her funeral, his voice strong despite his grief. She lived to see justice done, not just for herself but for others. She lived to know love and family and joy. That is all any of us can hope for. Adelaide stood beside her husband, supporting him as he had always supported her, and thought about the circle of life, the way pain could transform into purpose, the way love could heal even the deepest wounds. More years passed, and Adelaide and Yates celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone that filled them both with awe and gratitude. The ranch threw a massive celebration, with people coming from all over Arizona and beyond to honor the couple who had become something of a legend in the territory. During the festivities, a young woman approached Adelaide. She introduced herself as a journalist from back east, writing a story about remarkable women of the American West. "I heard about what happened to you," the journalist said, "and how Mr. Turner freed you. I would love to interview you both for my article, to share your story with readers who might not know that such things happened, and more importantly, that they were overcome." Adelaide looked at Yates, who nodded his encouragement. They had never hidden their story, had never been ashamed of how they began, but they had never sought publicity either. "All right," Adelaide agreed. "If it can help someone, if it can make people think about justice and freedom and the power of kindness, then yes, you can tell our story." The article, when it was published several months later in a prominent Eastern magazine, caused quite a stir. Adelaide received letters from women all over the country, thanking her for her courage, sharing their own stories of hardship and survival. Some of the letters broke her heart, tales of ongoing injustice and suffering. Others filled her with hope, stories of triumph and resilience. Adelaide answered every letter personally, offering encouragement and, when she could, practical help. She and Yates set up a fund to assist women who found themselves in desperate situations similar to what Adelaide had faced, working with lawyers and advocates to challenge unjust laws and practices. It became Adelaide's passion in her later years, this advocacy for women's rights and dignity. She spoke at churches and community gatherings, wrote letters to politicians and judges, and never missed an opportunity to share her story if she thought it could make a difference. Yates supported her completely, proud of the work she was doing, the lives she was touching. "You were always meant for great things," he told her. "I just helped you get free so you could do them." "We did it together," Adelaide corrected. "Everything good in my life we did together." On a warm spring day in 1920, Adelaide woke to find Yates watching her sleep, his weathered hand gently brushing a strand of white hair from her face. "Good morning," she murmured, smiling at him. "Why are you staring at me?" "Just remembering," Yates said softly. "All the mornings I have woken up next to you, all the moments we have shared. I am a very lucky man, Adelaide Turner." "I am the lucky one," Adelaide insisted, as she always did when they had this conversation. "No, we are both lucky," Yates said, settling the argument as he always did. "Lucky to have found each other, lucky to have built this life together." They spent the day together, walking through the ranch, visiting with family, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. That night, as they settled into bed, Yates pulled Adelaide close. "I love you," he said, as he had said every night for 36 years. "I will love you forever." "I love you too," Adelaide replied, nestling into his embrace. "Forever and always." Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep that night, his arms still around Adelaide, a slight smile on his face. Adelaide woke to find him gone, and though her heart broke with grief, she also felt a strange sense of rightness. He had lived a full life, a good life, surrounded by love until the very end. The funeral was massive, with hundreds of people coming to pay their respects to a man who had touched so many lives with his kindness and integrity. Adelaide stood strong through it all, supported by her children and grandchildren, sharing stories of Yates with anyone who wanted to listen. In the months that followed, Adelaide grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had too much to live for, too many people who needed her, too much of Yates's legacy to protect and continue. She threw herself into her advocacy work with renewed purpose, determined to make sure his kindness and compassion lived on through the lives they touched together. She lived for another 8 years, dying peacefully at the age of 79, surrounded by her family. Her last words were spoken to her oldest granddaughter, who leaned close to hear the whispered message. "Tell them," Adelaide said, her voice barely audible. "Tell them all that love is the only thing that matters. Love and freedom and choosing to be kind, even when it costs you something. Tell them to choose love always." Adelaide was buried next to Yates on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky so blue and vast it seemed to touch eternity. Their graves were marked with simple stones, inscribed with their names and the dates of their lives, and beneath that, a single shared inscription. They chose each other, and in choosing found freedom. The ranch continued on, passed down through generations, each one adding to the legacy while honoring the foundation laid by Yates and Adelaide. The story of how they met, how Yates had paid double to set Adelaide free, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder of what love could accomplish, what courage could achieve. In the main house, now preserved as part of the family ranch but updated for modern convenience, a portrait hung in the place of honor above the fireplace. It showed Yates and Adelaide on their 25th anniversary, still young enough to have color in their hair but old enough to have earned the peace in their expressions. They stood close together, Yates's arm around Adelaide's waist, Adelaide's hand resting over his heart, both of them looking at something beyond the frame with expressions of contentment and joy. Visitors to the ranch often asked about the portrait, about the couple who looked so perfectly matched, so obviously in love. And the family would tell the story, about the auction and the rancher, about freedom and choice, about a love that had grown from the darkest of circumstances into something that lit up the lives of everyone it touched. The story of Yates and Adelaide Turner became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of compassion, the importance of standing up against injustice, and the transformative nature of love freely given and freely received. It reminded people that even in the darkest times, even when the world seemed cruel and unfair, one person's choice to act with kindness could change everything. And so the legacy lived on, generation after generation, a love story born in the wild west of Arizona Territory, nurtured through years of partnership and devotion, and carried forward through time as a reminder that the greatest freedom of all is the freedom to choose love, to choose each other, to choose a future built on respect and partnership and unwavering commitment. The ranch still stands today, a working operation that has adapted to modern times while maintaining its connection to the past. Descendants of Yates and Adelaide still live there, still work the land, still tell the story of their remarkable ancestors who proved that love could triumph over even the cruelest circumstances, that freedom was worth fighting for, and that choosing kindness, even when it cost everything, was always the right choice. And sometimes, on warm spring evenings when the sunset paints the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson, visitors to the ranch swear they can see two figures walking hand in hand across the land, a tall rancher and the woman he loved, together still in spirit as they were in life, a testament to a love that truly was forever.